here to talk about my Reiju deck list that I've been using lately. I went 4-0 at a locals with it, meaning I got first place, which is good enough reason for me to make a video about it. Because it's not every day that I get first place. But I also went 3-1 at 2 other locals, so I've taken it to 3 so far. And I've been 3-1, 3-1, and 4-0. So basically I'm really liking the list, and I figured I would lay it out for you guys, show you what I'm playing. So I will assume you already know basically like how Reiju works. I'm not really here to explain the basics of the deck. I'm here to explain my ratios and stuff and certain tech choices or lack thereof to give more insight on the nuanced choices rather than like a generic overview. So I will start off by talking about the 2Ks, I guess. So basically I'm playing 15 2Ks, which is quite a lot. Most people don't play 15 2Ks. I think I've heard generally people play like 12 in this deck, because you play 4 Kaya, 4 Sora, obviously, both very good cards, and then you generally have space for about 4 more 2Ks, which you can choose from like Gion or the new blue Suru from OP06, or what is there, like Miss Doublefinger, because she can have a decent trigger. I don't like the trigger that much, but it does exist as an option. I'm also very happy about these alt arts that I pulled out of my packs. I usually don't open packs, but OP06 was very exciting and I wanted to partake, and I opened some packs and it actually worked out really well. This is the sewer I'm talking about, by the way. This usually, so far I have not summoned this a single time. It's just here because it is technically an option. If the only character on their field is a blocker, you can just bounce the blocker no matter how high its cost is. So like say, or a Eustace Captain Kid. This is actually a really nice kid, because say you're going against Uta and you've been dealing with their board every turn, and on their 9 Dawn turn or 10 Dawn turn, they play Kid, attach it on and pass. You can, I don't know, it's difficult, because they're also going to put a 3-cost blocker next to it, like the Uta blocker. But say you somehow, I don't know, magically have a way to deal with the blocker, this can then also bounce the Kid for 5 Dawn, making them spend their whole turn to play it again next turn. I don't know if that's actually like a realistic play, because if they have a 3-cost blocker, I don't know how you're going to deal with that, and then also play this outside of having 8 Dawn to bounce the blocker or KO it. And having 8 Dawn in this deck basically never happens, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because, oh, but Judge costs 8 Dawn. Well, that's the thing. Having 8 Dawn in this deck barely ever happens. Basically never. I can't remember the last time I actually got to 8 Dawn. It almost never happens. So we'll start with the 2Ks. So I'm playing 4 Kaya because it draws you cards and then discards your big German characters. So it's just a really, really, really good 2K. You don't want to summon it unless like you're desperate, like you really need to dig for your stage or for like one of the big ones that you don't have yet, for example. But it is not a bad thing to play a Kaya on like one of your first couple turns, or really just whenever. What I really try not to do as a rule of thumb is I don't want to play more than 1 Kaya on the field during a game, because that's, as soon as you play a second Kaya, that's now 2 2Ks that you've lost from your hand, and 2 Dawn that you don't get to spend on a character or pumping a swing. And I feel like 1 can like be recover, like you can recover from losing 1 2K out of hand if it helps you set up, but once you've spent 2 2Ks, that really hurts like your defenses, and that could like make or break the game, you not having that final 2K. So I really try not to play more than 1 Kaya to the field during a game. It's my little rule of thumb that's been working out. This card can be literally any 2K. I'm just playing Suru because it's shiny, and I like the effect more than Miss Doublefinger's effect, but really it could be any 2K that fits in the deck. Just pick one. And then for Gion, I love this card because it makes certain matchups just free. Like Nami is free. You play this for 4 Dawn, and if they can't deal with it, every single time they play an event, once per turn, they lose a card for free. And it's also a 5K that can help you get attacks in. And with this deck, Reiju character is filling your hand back up so much that you will have the counter to like swing with it and then protect it. Like you just will have the counter, because I play 15 2Ks. So I really like this card. I think it's, you know, the 3rd best 2K after Kaya and Sora. And I would not lower it to less than 4 because it makes Nami free, and then it's also really good against like random like defensive decks, like green purple Doflamingo plays a lot of events, or like yellow purple Croc plays a lot of events. Basically any defensive event heavy deck, this kind of makes them just free to beat. So I really like it, and worst case scenario, it still swings for 5 with no Dawn investment. So that's really nice. And then 4 Soras because it's just an absolutely insane card. If this was a 1K, you would probably still play 4 just because the on-play effect is that good for flexibility purposes. So that's the 15 2Ks. Then we'll go to the little guy ratios and the big guy ratios. So of course we play 4 Reiju because she draws you into the rest of your cards. I pulled both of these Altards out of booster boxes and packs, and I'm very happy about that. I think one was from a pre-release and one was from a booster box. Nobody cares, but I'm very happy about it. Same for this. I'm very pleased that I pulled this. So these are the 4 Reijus, of course. Helps you dig through your deck for more combo pieces. 4 Niji. This one, some people play at 3, but I don't play Yonji. So I really feel like I'm basically cutting the Yonjis to play max copies of all the other Vinsmokes. And I don't like the Yonji because it's kind of, there's 2 reasons. The first reason is you only have so much deck space, and the more moving parts there are, meaning the more different Germalines you run, the less likely you are to see the matching pairs. Like, the less likely I am to see the big Reiju and the little Reiju when I need them, the more pieces there are floating around in the deck. Because you only have 50 deck slots. So every slot that a Yonji takes up is a slot that some other card can't be there for. So like a Niji, for example. So I really like not only playing 3 different lines, not the Yonji. And I do like this card at 4 copies anyway, because the effect is really good. I think it's less good than these 2, but still so much better than Yonji. Because Yonji is not a proactive card. It's just a blocker, meaning your opponent has all the time in the world on their turn to rest it or KO it or put it back in your hand before you get a chance to block with it. And that feels really bad. It feels very easy for them to punish with an Amaru or an Izo or literally any way to deal with a blocker because it has no protection. So I really don't like it. I like all 3 of these because they do something right when you play them. They give you value. So even if your opponent kills it with an Absalom or something, you already got your value out of it, which you cannot be said for Yonji. And this guy's amazing. He will apply so much tempo and pressure just like this. These are basic. This one's better, but they're very similar in that they get a body on board while neutralizing one of your opponent's bodies. Because this will either KO it or put it back in its hand, or this will lower their power such that you can swing like 5 into 3 or 7 into 5 to a point where they're not going to counter 2 cards because it's not worth it. So both of these basically establish a body while getting rid of a body. And obviously drawing cards helps you find your other power plays. So we play 4 Niji because the effect is good, as I've explained. And then of course we play 4 Ichiji because rush and making blockers smaller is so big. It doesn't really matter when you're going for lethal, but it can definitely matter in the mid game where say they have a 6k blocker. If you swing 5 at lead and they block for 6 and that 6 survives until next turn, they can do it again. They can block your 6, or they can block your 5 with a 6 for free a second time, and it just gives them a lot of value. So being able to say, no, your 6k blocker is actually a 4k blocker, and now I'm going to swing at you, and if you block with your 4k blocker, it'll die instead of living there for the next turn. It's just really good. It deals with Sabos, it deals with Borsalinos, it deals with Queens. Going for lethal, it can still maybe make your opponent misplay if they don't know you're going for lethal. Let me explain. So say they have a 6k blocker like a queen. We'll say this is their queen. And you play Ichiji and lower the queen to 4k and then swing 5 at life. If they don't expect you to go for lethal that turn, they might be tempted to block 4k with the queen and then counter with a 2k to save the queen. And now that's a 2k out of their hand that you don't have to worry about when you do go for lethal that same turn. So they might not do this, but this is a potential route for them to misplay that you can like tempt them into, is if you lower their 6k blocker to 4 and then swing 5, they might be tempted to counter and save it and basically waste a counter they could have used to stop your lethal. So just something to think about. And then, of course, it can lower opposing Ichiji's or other opposing 7Ks down to 5, or like it lowers a 7K Luffy blocker down to 5, and then you can swing 7 without them being able, or you can swing 5 without them getting a free block. You can swing 7 at the 5K Luffy to clear it off the board if you're not going lethal that turn. It just has all the utility in the world on top of having Rush. So those are the Germas, the Villain Smokes, 444. Talked about the 2Ks, and then these are self-explanatory. Just you have 8 searchers in the deck. I mean, 12 if you count Sora searching out of your trash. And so you just want these because a lot of times I usually go second. Like if I get the choice, I pretty much always pick to go second. Even against Moria, I don't know if that's correct because Moria does want to go first, but basically I always choose second anyway. And so a lot of times if I get these two in my opening hand, it feels amazing because 2 Dawn on your first turn, you use the 1-cost searcher to find a big guy, and then you play the stage for your second Dawn and trash the big guy to find a little guy or another big guy. It's just a very, very good use of 2 Dawn. In the late game, I usually don't play this. I end up discarding it for the stage, or if I hit it off life, I'll trigger it because you're usually spending all your Dawn on characters every turn if you can help it. And so I really don't like wasting that Dawn on this because it might say I'm on my 5 Dawn turn, right? If I or say I'm on my 6 Dawn turn, really is probably a more likely example. On 6 Dawn, you can play both of these characters and use them in the same turn. That is not true if you spend the Dawn on Germa 66. So if you have these 3 if I have these 3 in my hand on 6 Dawn, I'm never playing this. I'm always going for 2 bodies because playing 2 characters in one turn, especially if you can do that on back-to-back turns, is how you steal games with this deck or just win games that you should be winning. This is what you need to do. You need to play 2 characters on the same turn. It applies so much pressure, so much tempo, and a lot of times you can't do that if you willy-nilly spend a Dawn on this card, and then you're like, oh wait, I could have played 2 characters, but now I can't because I'm 1 Dawn short. So I'm almost never using this in the late game, but I am absolutely using it in the early game to find my stage or to find something to discard to my stage. And if I hit it off life, I'm usually triggering it. Pretty much always triggering it, just so I don't have to waste the Dawn. And then I play 3 Pudding for the final 3 slots. This card is so good. It can steal games if your opponent's not prepared for it. Just like it's like a skill check. Like with purple decks, if you're playing Blocker Law, the purple Blocker Law, and your opponent has 6 cards in hand, or like let's say, I don't know, you guys know what I'm talking about. Say your opponent goes first, or you go first, your opponent goes second, they draw to 6. If your first action on your second turn is swinging 5 at life, they might just take it, forgetting that you have Blocker Law in your available card pool, and then you punish them by playing Blocker Law, and now they discard 2 random cards. This fills a very similar role in that if your opponent's not expecting it or remembering to play around it, you can just get free games that would have been way harder otherwise. It's also because you can just rip 2 or 3 cards out of their hand while establishing a body. This is one of the few times I won't, like I'll rarely not spend all my Dawn on characters in a turn, is if I have one of these active, I might put a Dawn on it just to get an extra 5k swing. But even then, a lot of times I will just leave it active and not swing with it because playing 2 Germa bodies for the turn is more important than getting an extra 5k swing that they'll just counter out of anyway. Playing 2 bodies is more important, but if I can't do that, if I can only play 1, and I have like 1 Dawn left over, I probably will attach it to Pudding and swing. Or something really cool that can come up, say they have a 5k attacker rested, like a Hogback, for example. Say this is a Hogback and they attacked with it last turn. You can play Ichiji, lower the Hogback to 3k, and then swing at 3 with your 4k Pudding, and they're probably not countering out with a 2k to save that. And if they do, you just swing at it again with Leader, and they wasted a 2k. So this is actually a really nice combo that comes up occasionally against decks with a lot of 5k swingers. And I play 3 because it does give you so many free wins that I want to always see it when I want to see it. You know, like I'd rather want it, or like have it and not need it, than need it and not have it. So I play 3 because even if you have it and don't need it, you just counter out because it has 1k counters. You just counter out of their Leader swings. And it's just such free ability to punish your opponent for not playing around it, especially if they have 8 or more cards in hand. It's you probably just win. Like if you didn't brick and you make your opponent go from 8 cards to 5, you're almost certainly winning that game because that's just such a huge swing. And the other time it's good is against decks that play a lot of searchers, which right now is mostly just Sakazuki. Because Sakazuki's first couple turns will be like Tashigi, add a card to hand. Well, like, let's say they start with 5 in hand, right? Tashigi, add a card to hand. And then their next play, next turn, will be like brand new, add a card to hand. And they also drew that turn. And then say you attack them for like 6 or something. Sokka often doesn't have counter early game, or even if you attack them for 5, they might just take it because they need to find combo pieces. So if you attack them for 5 and they take it, they're already at 7 cards by the time you get to like your 4 or 5 on turn. And pudding is just so free to play. Also, I have seen, let's say Sokka goes second, right? Because they'll probably go second to take second from you and also like play on their ideal curve. So they'll have 6 cards on their first turn because they're going second. They play a searcher like a Tashigi or a Branu. They get a card from it. Then on their next turn, they draw for turn. Play another one, or like let's say on your second turn, you swing at them and they take it, and then they draw for turn. Play another searcher, get another card, and then on your turn, you swing at them again, and perhaps they take it again, and then they're at 8 cards. This is a very common scenario. I know that might have been hard to follow. Sorry. The point is, they will play cards their first couple turns, but those cards put a card back in their hand. So their hand size is not going down over the course of the turns up to you playing pudding, meaning they're just going to have a stacked hand because they haven't lost any card advantage yet. So it's very, very common for Sakazuki or Uta, because Uta draws a card most turns off of its leader ability. It's very common for those decks to have 8 card hands or higher, and pudding makes those matchups so easy. If you pudding an Uta from like their common 8 or 9 card hand down to 5, you're almost guaranteed to win. Because all that time they spent setting up their like Luffy Brook Uta combo, or like finding their late game cards like Kid, it's all just reset and they lose all that card advantage. And then you start swinging at them and they don't have counter perhaps, or they don't want to counter because their hand is so small now and they need those combo pieces. Like they don't want to counter their Brook or their Uta because they need it to play next turn. You just get free hits with your 5k attacks that might not have gone through if they had an 8 or 9 card hand. So basically what I'm saying is pudding makes Sokka easy, and it makes Uta very easy. And because it's so good in the matchups that it's good in, I play 3 because I want to see it when I need it. And now the other, I've already talked about why I don't play Yonji. The final point I want to touch on is, you might have noticed that I don't play Judge, because as I mentioned earlier, I almost never get to 8 Dawn in this deck, because my first few turns I'm Dawn minusing to play like one guy a turn, you know? Like my first turn might be this, and my second turn is this, and then my third turn is this. Or my third turn, because you start at 2, and then next turn you go 4 minus 1, so you're at 3. And then you're at 2 plus 2, next turn you're at 4. So like these might be my first 3 turns, for example, or like more likely I play a stage turn 1. So these might be my first 3 turns. And then on the next turn, I'm going 2 bodies in whatever combination happens to be available. You know, so I'm going 2 bodies, that's Dawn minus 2. So I got 2 Dawn on my turn, but then I'm Dawn minusing 2. So my net Dawn stayed the same. I'm not going up a Dawn next turn, which is why I basically never get to 8 Dawn in this deck, because once I hit like 5 or 6, I start Dawn minusing 2 every turn, and I never go up to 8, or even sometimes I never even go up to 7, because I'm Dawn minusing 2 every turn once I hit 6 Dawn, which is what you want to be doing. That is how you apply pressure. And Judge is only possible to play if you're not doing that, which is why I don't like it. I don't like having to play badly or like slowly or suboptimally in the first several turns just so I can play a Judge on like turn 6 or 7. Because it's just too late at that point. And also I noticed every time I played Judge, I was probably going to win that game anyway without having the Judge, because my board was just that good. And if they can't beat you only playing 1 character a turn, which is what you have to do to play Judge, you have to only play 1 character a turn, or your Dawns won't increase. If they can't beat you playing 1 character a turn, they definitely can't beat you playing 2 characters a turn. So why wouldn't you just play 2 characters and not have Judge clogging up your deck slots? Because that's the other thing. I mentioned that pudding is so good because even if it's not useful at the time, I don't know where I put it, you can just counter with it. Even if you don't need the pudding, you can just counter out with it and still get use out of it that way. Judge has no counter. So if you have a Judge in your hand early game, that card is dead, because you can't play it till turn 6 or 7, and it has no counter, meaning you're just going to be discarding it for your stage probably, which you might not which like is good if it's your only card with no counter, but say you have like 2 ETGs as well, or like a second stage and an ETG and a judge or something. If you have 3 cards with no counter, your stage can only discard one of them, meaning you'll still have 2 cards with no counter, meaning your opponent might get hits in that they wouldn't have otherwise if that judge was a 2K, for example. So in the slots that most people play 2 judge, that's where I'm putting in my 3rd pudding and my 15th 2K. That's where those ratios come from, is from me cutting the 2 copies of judge. Everything else in this list is like fairly standard. Like most people don't play events besides the searcher. Most people don't play Yonji. Some do, but most people do play judge, and I think judge is kind of a trap. Like, it's a win more card. You were probably going to win that game anyway if you got to the point where you could play judge. And the reason why I say you can't play till turn 6 or 7 is because that is how the Dawn math works. So let's say you go second, which is what I usually choose. You start with 2 Dawn. Say you play a Kaya or a stage or something, you don't Dawn minus that turn. Then on your second turn, right, so here's like the turn. So that was our first turn. Then on your second turn, you go up to 4. Say you play a Vinsmoke, you Dawn -1. On your third turn, you go up to 5. Say you play a Vinsmoke. Now here you could play 2 Vinsmokes, but we're going to say you're only playing 1 a turn because you want to be able to play judge later. And you're not playing 0 Vinsmokes a turn unless you play pudding. And we'll just assume, like, most games you don't play pudding. So we're going to assume you're not playing it because you want to like play cards that are relevant, and pudding might not be relevant at the time, but these are almost always relevant. So let's say you're playing 1 Vinsmoke a turn and not summoning pudding this game, for the sake of the example. So on your third turn, you go up to 5, and then you play a character to Dawn minus back to 4. On your fourth turn, so it was like 2, so turn 1, 2, 3. On your fourth turn, you go up to 6, Dawn minus to play a character. Fifth turn, go up to 7, Dawn minus to play a character. On your 6th turn is when you finally get to 8 Dawn. You should be winning the game on turn 6, if not like putting yourself in a position to win the game next turn, which you can do without judge anyway if you just play 2 characters instead of like play a Niji and an Ichiji for 7 and then like attach the extra Dawn to another Niji to swing for 7 instead of 6, for example. This can be your 7 Dawn spending instead of spending 8 Dawn for judge, and it does a very similar thing, which is set you up to go for lethal next turn. The reason you play judge is to get a bunch of bodies on board to go for lethal. You have enough bodies without that. The deck just summons so many bodies so easily that you will get in lethal range without playing judge if you just play 2 cards a turn. 2 characters a turn, that is. And that's if you're going second. If you're going first, the math is the same, except you start with 1 less Dawn. So you actually would be at 7 Dawn on turn 6, meaning you don't get to 8 Dawn, like let's say you Dawn minus, you don't get to 8 Dawn until turn 7. And then you're playing a judge instead of going for lethal. You should be winning the game on turn 7. Like that is the end game. You should not be, wait till I untap next turn and then I go for lethal. Like on turn 7, you should win anyway. So if you're going first, judge is a dead card. You're not gonna get to turn 7 without going for lethal that turn if you're really like playing optimally. So judge is basically a blank card going first, and it's only useful going second if you can not brick on it early, or if you do have it early, just be able to hold it long enough to last it to turn 6 to play it, and then win on turn 7. But in most games, basically all games, which is, in my opinion, which is why I'm not playing it, you can win without judge by just going lethal with those Dawns that you would have spent for judge. And just playing 2 characters a turn instead of playing 1 a turn so that you can judge eventually. Just play 2 characters a turn. You're fine if you stay at 5 or 6 Dawn for the whole game. You can still win because your characters are just so cheap. Yeah, don't know why I'm shuffling this, but I think I made my point. I don't play judge because it feels like a win more card, and you should just be winning the game instead of playing judge. And that basically summarizes my list. I don't play queen. Queen's fine. I don't think it's 5 Dawn, so like you're not getting to 5 Dawn until it's like turn 4 or 5, or not, like turn 4 probably is when you get to 5 Dawn. And at 5 Dawn, instead of playing a 6k blocker that fills up my hand, I'd rather play a 2-drop 5k that fills up my hand and a 3-drop 6k that applies tempo by bouncing an opposing character. Like, I'd rather play these 2 cards for 5 Dawn than play a 5 Dawn 6k blocker and like get less swings in the following turn. I'd rather just play these. And the other one I was wanting to try out, which I haven't tried yet, but I do want to try it out, is Blocker Law, the purple one. Because like I said, it's very similar to Pudding in that it can just punish people who aren't playing around it. But also the discards are random, and they don't go back in their deck, so they can't find those cards again. They're just down those resources. And they're and he's also a blocker, which is like, I don't play Yonji because it's only a blocker, but at least Law is a blocker and rips 2 cards out of their hand. So it's just extra value on top of also being a blocker as a plus. But it's also 5k naturally instead of 4k, meaning you can swing without a Dawn investment. So Law feels like it has a lot of pros and cons. Well, not even cons. The only con with Law is that it maxes out at 2 card advantage, like ripping 2 cards in their hand. Pudding can rip more than 2 cards in a lot of scenarios. So that's like the one thing it has going for it over Law is it can rip more card advantage out of their hand. But Law swings for 5 without a Dawn investment and is also a blocker in case that comes up. So I feel like Law has its merits and I want to try it out. I just haven't tried it yet. And as for matchups, I'd basically say like my scariest matchups are Katakuri because they want to go second and that makes you not able to go second. So you just have 1 less Dawn to work with and 1 less card that you get to draw. And if they hit their triggers, they can out-tempo you. Especially if they have like Onami triggers to bop your Reijus and Nijis before they get to swing. And they can just cheese you on triggers, like as always. You really just want to go as aggressive as humanly possible and hope they don't get good triggers. And the matchup feels like very, very, very neck and neck down to the wire. And I'm always like, if I go up against Katakuri, I'm scared. Like this could go either way. Obviously, RP Law is like an auto loss. And then the mirror, the Reiju mirror, is pretty much whoever Dawn minuses first wins, and that's very important. Not whoever goes first, whoever Dawn minuses. You do want to go first because it gives you a better chance of having a Reiju into Reiju play or a Niji into Niji play on your second turn when you're at 3 Dawn. It makes one of these more likely for you if you go first because you'll get 3 Dawn. So these are both available instead of only 2 Dawn. But the thing is, if you do go first, your opponent could cheese you because I did just win a Reiju mirror right before this on the sim, before making this video, where I had to go second, but in my opening hand, I had this card, and that made the difference because on my first turn for 2 Dawn, I played this Dawn minus down to 1, and I didn't even have a 4-cost Reiju to play off of it. I did that just so I could get the first Dawn minus, so that my opponent's Dawn minuses would never make them equal to me, meaning they had vanillas in their deck instead of cards with effects. And I got to play the cards with effects, even though I basically had to waste a Dawn and a card out of hand to get to that point where I Dawn minus first. It was worth it because all my cards had effects the rest of the game, even though that first card I played did nothing and just went to my trash. It did help that my next turn, I drew a Reiju 4-cost, and I had Sora in my hand. So, like, my first turn for 2 Dawn, I played this and did nothing with it. Dawn minus. And then my second turn, I'm at 3 Dawn. I play Sora to get this back out of my trash, and then play this for the other 2 Dawn to play the Reiju I just drew for turn. And that drew me 3 cards. So that kept me in the game. This is what got me in the game in the first place. If I didn't have this in my opening hand, I already lost. Because they were going to Dawn minus before me and just play cards faster than me. But because I had this in my hand, even though I didn't have this, I still got to Dawn minus first, making their cards useless. And I drew this the next turn and was able to fill my hand back up and keep applying pressure. So just a little thought on the Reiju mirror. You can win if you go second with that like cheesy play, which Yonji also helps in the mirror because Yonji is another 2-cost card that you can play on your first turn going second. But that's such a niche scenario that I don't think it's worth playing Yonji just to like cheese some wins off the Reiju mirror match. Like, it's just too narrow of a scenario to make playing Yonji worth it. But if you do play Yonji, keep that in mind. You can cheese wins off your opponent in the mirror if you have to go second, because you can play it on your first turn to Dawn minus. But yeah, something to keep in mind. You can win games that way, so don't forget. And that basically summarizes my video and my list and my matchup thoughts. Also, Sokka, I feel comfortable in a Sakazuki. I feel very comfortable into Green Uta, and I feel comfortable into Moria just because you can out-tempo them and just go so aggressive. Katakuri is the main one where it's like, oh, it could go either way, and then Red Purple Law is obviously just like really bad. Also, Yamato, I feel pretty comfortable into Yamato, even with no blockers, because I play 15 2Ks. So I'm just going to counter out of every Yamato swing, and they'll basically never get their double attack off unless I want them to. And having all those 2Ks makes the Yamato matchup just so comfortable. That's basically my thoughts. Let me know if you have any opinions, or like if this was useful to you with all these tips. I'd love to know that. Leave a comment for me, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.